Hey, welcome to the shop. No clickbait here, folks. I tripled my money on this 2005 Suzuki 650 Bandit, mainly because of one small part. I never expect a flip project to do that well, so I see this as some kind of cosmic accident. I'll share all the details about the money, and before you pull the trigger on that comet you have loaded into the firing chamber of your flamethrower, I'll ask that you give me a chance to explain why I'm not an evil person who tries to gouge buyers. But first, let me tell you the story of how this happened. Yeah, it's another story. But hey, here on this channel, we aim to both entertain and inform. So if you stick around to the end, you'll know what I learned from this project, and it might even help you someday. This bike was in decent shape when I got it. It was being stored outdoors, uncovered, I think for about a year. I'll spare you my rant about the tragedy of uncovered motorcycles. I got that out of my system in my last video. To be fair to the seller, he didn't have indoor storage for this bike. Winter was closing in, and he knew it would only suffer more damage, so to his credit, he set the price low to make sure it would sell. That's not a slam dunk in October, here in the Great White North. Before that last year, this Bandit appears to have lived a pampered life. The plastic and paint were in exceptional condition. It had fairly low mileage and a few issues, but overall, I'd say before its most recent run of bad luck, it had been stored indoors, properly maintained, and regularly used. It did have new tires, and all the consumable or wearing parts still had lots of life. So what was wrong with it, you ask? Well, I guess it got bumped and knocked off its center stand a couple of times in its parking lot prison. That left a scar on the fairing, a broken mirror, and a broken turn signal, and a few other scratches. There was also some rusted metal and oxidized aluminum from its recent unsheltered life, but it wasn't bad as flip projects go. However, it did have one serious problem. What was that, you ask? Well, it wasn't running. Why? Because it had an aftermarket ignition switch. And it had an aftermarket ignition switch because the previous owner lost his only key and skewered the original switch with a screwdriver. Why? And why didn't that aftermarket switch work? Well, that I do know. You see, this bike, like many others, is equipped with a so-called immobilizer circuit. That's marketing speak, meaning there's a 100 ohm resistor in the ignition switch. That resistor is in a circuit going to the ECU. I'll say ECU, but Suzuki calls it an igniter, and from what I can tell, it's just like an ECU. The ECU can tell by the voltage drop whether that resistor is in fact installed. And why would the ECU care if that resistor is installed, you ask? Well, first of all, you and all the questions. That's because if somebody tries to hotwire the bike by bypassing the ignition switch, the ECU just wouldn't let them get away with it. The ECU has some serious clout. I mean, just look at the org chart. So it gets its way. In this case, it refuses to allow ignition spark, and no spark, no go. So, astutely recognizing that he needed a new ignition switch, our seller bought a copy from a land far, far away. And believe it or not, the copy isn't always identical to the original, even if they look the same. Sure enough, this copy didn't have our little resistor friend. Our seller knew about the resistor, and he installed one of the right size on what should have been the right terminals, but still no spark. So he threw in the towel and put it up for sale. And just to prove that I had learned nothing from his experience, I bought another copy on eBay, but this one was advertised to fit this very bike. And you can imagine my shock when I realized that that switch, made just for my bike, wasn't going to work on my bike. It had a different connector than the OEM and a different number of wires. From what I can tell, some company makes knockoff switches and markets them by saying they fit every bike in the known Suzuki verse. They got me good. Touché. So I had to come up with a plan B. The aftermarket switch already on the bike didn't come with the right connector either, so it was patched in by cutting the wiring harness, and thankfully I had the OEM switch with the resistor in place, as well as what remained of the wiring harness. And here's what the previous owner should have done, and how I got myself out of this jam. You can easily swap the lock cylinders between switches, and by some freak of nature, the cylinder from the aftermarket switch I bought worked perfectly with the OEM switch. Now I had a key for the OEM switch, so I wired it up, and sure enough, I got spark. The bike wasn't hard to get running after that. It smoked a bit, like every bike that has been sitting too long will do. That went away after a short while, and then I did my usual repairs, maintenance, and a makeover of the cosmetics. I explain how I do all that in another video, so I'll link it here in case you'd like to check it out. I was able to buy aftermarket mirrors and front turn signals that matched the OEM versions, and that fixed the last issues this bike had. So after that, it was a nice working, nice looking bike that was ready for a good home. So this is where I talk about the money, and hopefully prove to you that even though I made a good return on this bike, I'm not an evil person who tries to gouge buyers. I bought this bike in a package deal with a 2009 Honda CBR 125R for a total of 1,000 Canadian dollars, which right now is about $800 US. For the sake of doing the math here, I'll assume I paid $500 for each bike, and here's what I spent to get this Bandit ready to sell. So I'll show you how it all worked out by using my trusty Hewlett-Packard 28S. Reverse Polish notation never lies. I bought the bike for $500 and spent another $400 to get it ready to sell, for a total of $900. I sold it for $2,800. So if I subtract the $900 I invested from the $2,800, I have $1,900 left over. I don't know how that works out on an hourly basis because I don't do this on a clock. I do it as a hobby, and more importantly as a way to save old motorcycles from a premature death of neglect. So, about the not being evil thing. Yes, I made a good return on this bike, but I also got it for an abnormally low price. Plus, it's risky buying an old bike that doesn't run. That silence can hide a lot of dark secrets. It was a calculated risk, because these bikes are known to be fairly reliable, and the seller assured me it was a solid runner. I told the buyer of this bike its story and how I got it for a bargain. He's a sensible guy who totally understood that I should ask a fair market price, and I did. In fact, he got it for a bit less than most others were asking at the time for comparable bikes. So it was a win-win-win for him, me, and the bike, which went to a good home. So, I said we try in this channel to be informative, and here's what I learned from this experience. It's possible to find good flip projects, but it's rare when they go this well. Aftermarket ignition switches made for your bike might not fit your bike, but the lock cylinder inside just might. And, most importantly, a screwdriver doesn't make a good key. Thanks for watching.